Our contributions in education will be our legacy in this industry.
Whether it's through live education or maybe through social media, we're always trying to make a personal connection with you, the learner.
At Zambia, we believe our smile is our business card and our personality is our logo. And how we make people feel after you experience our education and tools is our trademark.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us, my friends, and be a part of the Zambia community.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. I'm Andrew Carruthers for Zambia. Thanks so much for joining us on your Wednesday evening, afternoon. Maybe it's even like morning or something, depending on where you're watching from, because I know we have quite the international audience that tends to tune in. So today we've got a great guest. Before we get to that, just a couple little housekeeping messages for you. If you are interested tomorrow, or sorry, no, it's not tomorrow. I'm going to take that right back down because I just messed up. I thought it was tomorrow, but I guess that Facebook Live was today. So anyway, let's skip that and let's talk about the specials. So this week, Zambia.com, you got Streamline Series shears, save $125 off. Artist Series blow dryer, $70 off. Midnight Blue Edition is still 40% off. Trust me, guys, as a sexy color. So if you're looking for a blow dryer, I think that might be one you want to check out. So today, hi everybody, thanks for checking in. If you're just checking in, type into the chat where you're watching from. We love to hear from you guys. Welcome. Tonight, today, this evening, this afternoon, wherever you're watching from, we have the man, Gordon Miller. This dude is legendary in the hair industry. He's been doing this for 40 years. Yep, he started when he was 2 years old because he's really young. So he's have a ton of different senior leadership positions within our industry. He's definitely been a very influential person. He was VP for the member schools for Pivot Point. He was president of Milady's Publishing. He was a publisher at American Salon and their online platform. But most importantly, right now, he is the CEO of Hairbrained.me with Gerard. And, we can't say enough about how much we love what Hairbrained is doing. I think sometimes maybe people get the impression that within the education platforms, there's some sort of competition, but it couldn't be more the opposite. We have mad love and mad support for Hairbrained, and they do the same for this. They actually shared one of our videos the other day. What do you think of that? Kind of cool, right? Gordon also has a brilliant podcast, which I get to be on real soon. And so let's just in the chat, let's say hello, give him some love. Let's bring on Mr. Gordon Miller.
Hey, up, Andrew. Hey, I'm here with you, and it is evening in Chicago. And yes. I was a lot older than 2 when I started, but Medicare is coming up, and I'm excited.
If there's any left.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored, and thanks to Sam as well. And as you said, we are all in this together, and we're such fans of what you all do, and the fact that you guys have a sexy blow dryer. I didn't even know that until I just heard you. And so you guys do some really special stuff in your tool business and certainly in education. And Sam is renowned. And you're one of my favorite educators on the planet. I've just seen you so many times, and you've got some serious educator chops, my good sir.
Thank you, brother. That is so kind of you. I appreciate that so much. And, again, we're so happy to have you on here because I think this is a merging of 2 great platforms. But most importantly, today we want to dive into some kind of serious conversation because when we first reached out to you to talk about what we could bring to this Wellness Wednesday platform, one of the first things that came up is that there were so many things that we saw were maybe down the road a little ways for change that got really accelerated this past year. A lot of us weren't ready for it, made us pretty uncomfortable, but we want to also kind of talk about how do we manage those challenges, how do we manage those changes, and also kind of get ourselves ready for the continual changes that we'll see coming forward.
Yeah.
So before we get into it, I'd kind of like to know, just in your career, what are some of the things that you've seen as big changes in these past 40 years within the industry, like a few highlights?
That could take the whole hour.
Yeah, that's why I said a few highlights.
40 years is a long time, and the industry is significantly different today than it was back then. However, and we'll talk about this, I feel fortunate that I've been through all of it in the way that I have, because in some ways I feel like we're kind of going to be headed back to where I started. And what I mean by that is, one of the things I think that will come out of the pandemic, which we'll talk about, is I think local is going to become so much more important to the industry. And I think, in the country, we're thinking about shopping local. In the industry, I think we're going to be talking more about teaching local. I think when I grew up in the industry, I'm not a hairdresser. I was never a salon owner. I got a degree in investment finance and a minor in economics, which sounds so impressive and is not. I got done and I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I don't want to do investment finance and I don't want to do economics. And I kind of found my way into the industry completely by accident. But back in those days, there was like 500 hairdresser clubs around the country, and they taught at the local level, and it was extremely organized under the National Cosmetology Association. And it was actually some amazing, really profound stuff that forms much of the foundation of the industry that we have today. So I lived through those beginning. The beginning part of my career and how education was happening. And then we saw the distribution world evolve. We saw the manufacturing world evolve. We didn't have the big brand events that we have today back then. So we saw things change from local to more regional to national. And I feel like the pendulum might be swinging back. Big events, the recessions, a couple of them, 9/11, had a similar, like, really dramatic impact on the country and therefore our industry. And now we're going through a different version of this. And to me, all the changes I've seen, this feels like the one that's supercharged. Thought leaders outside the industry just say trends are being accelerated, and you referred to that, and I think it's so true. And those of us who live in the digital space, and you're very much a part of that, I think if we put aside, our concern for our fellow professionals and the pain that many are suffering, if we look past that and just think about opportunity, I think those of us who live in this space are extremely excited. I've been banging the drum about social media and digital media for 10 years. Yeah. And it feels like once we come out of this, that we're going to be in a very different world in this industry as it relates to both of those things.
Yeah. That's interesting because when I was living in Salt Lake City, one of the hair shows, the first hair shows that I was part of was with the National Cosmetology Association. And Linda was trying to kind of create one of those groups within Salt Lake. So I think it was kind of the end point of those kind of specific clubs, but it was so much fun. And it's interesting when you said that, because it registered that so many of the things that like Hairbrained is doing, Elevate is doing, like, we are kind of already seeing that return to these more localized, small, tight-knit community kind of education platforms.
Yep. And, it also speaks to, I think, there's a few words that are like rambling around in my head these days because of the pandemic. And one of them is niches. We live in such a niched out world, in every industry, and our industry is very niched out. And yet when we talk about the industry, we have a tendency to talk about salons, especially in pandemic. What's happening to salons? My question is, what's happening to each category of salons? Because they're all very different. The independents are different than commission, big commissions different than smaller commission, the suites, the chains, the value price salons. Every one of those segments is responding differently to the pandemic and is being impacted differently to the impact. So I struggle to talk about, well, what's the impact of any big event on the industry? It's much more interesting when you look at the niches to find out where the challenges are, but also where the next big opportunities are.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And we do kind of say salons almost as this kind of big picture, but you're so right. I mean, especially now, there are so many different choices. You have, within booth rent, we used to think of booth rental as you rented a booth inside of a big salon. But now there's suites, there's kind of mini suites,
chairs.
I mean, there's every aspect
Yep.
And you're totally right. Each individual aspect of the salon industry is handling this thing so differently. And to your point, the digital kind of platforms like Hairbrained, like Zambia, that we kind of were on the forefront of this digital education. Last year we were like, okay, we're kind of ready for this. Like we were kind of built to manage this.
Yep.
We were very fortunate to have that foundation. And Anna was asking, is facilitating digital going to be the future of the industry? Which I'd be kind of curious, since we're on that topic of digital education too. What you said about these localized things. What is your perception? Do you think we are still going to be primarily digital at this point, or do you see a return to live education?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a hybrid model, going forward. And I think that interestingly, so I was fortunate enough to be brought to work at Pivot Point in 1986. I was there for 10 years. Cool. And I left. I was a VP when I left, and Leo Passage, the founder, was my mentor, until he passed about 10 or 11 years ago. Very, very close to him. He was a genius. He was talking about using digital, in particular, barcode education, which is an older story. But he was talking about the importance of an education of, first of all, perfect presentations, which he believed were best done in a studio. Then he believed that you edited those presentations with facilitation to the question, facilitation in mind. In other words, he thought that the traditional demo and workshop model was highly inefficient because there was so much time that was wasted. And he's like, we need to spend our time doing and working and being. So the demo time he found very inefficient. So he's like, if we can capture the perfect video and edit it in such a way where we don't have to show section upon section upon section, he's like, repeat the right things, but not everything, and create efficiencies. He would be so excited if he was still here with us, because what he was talking about 10, 15, even 20 years ago is happening. And I've always agreed with him, that participating in the school world for such a long time, that facilitation, when it's done right, is genius. And so I do believe that facilitation will become a really much more powerful and important part of the industry. But I also believe we're going to go very much back to where we were. But I think it's going to be different. The economics are different. People's budgets are going to be tight perhaps for a while. I think we're going to just think about all the extras in life different than we used to, and education and shows and travel are some of the extras. So I do think the prioritization of what we do and how we do it is going to be very different.
Yeah, for sure. Just because you kind of mentioned that word, and what do you think will happen with shows? Do you have a concept of what we'll see happen with shows?
I think anytime there's an opportunity for a digital connection to any part of the industry. So whether we're talking distribution, where we see e-com really blowing up, whether we see things like Hairbrain does, selling tools, Zambia sells tools, we've seen that ramp up in a really big way. I think schools, education, same with shows. My prediction is that shows, again, I think are going to become more localized again. When I was growing up, that every state had a show, every region had a show, every big city had a show. And then we watched those slowly go away. And I think, they're going to come back. I think less is more is going to be, kind of important going forward. But I also believe that the best of those will be put out like we are now at Facebook Live. The opportunity to share has never been greater. And as much as so many of us, we like the way it was, I always have to remind myself that most people don't get to participate the way we do and have. In other words, we're like, oh, education's great. It is. 80% of professionals don't get to experience it the way that we would like them to. So I that's what excites me most about what's coming, is this kind of combination of all these different parts of the industry with digital infusing new energy, new access. To me, it's a total game changer. I've met too many people in my career who have not been everything they wanted to be just because they couldn't get access to the right stuff, and those walls are coming down.
Yeah,
that's exciting.
Totally, man. I think one of the greatest things about this digital platform is it's made things accessible to pretty much everyone. Because even price, it's like pricing for digital education, even that has dropped so significantly. Like when we first started putting out, online education that was actually a pay platform, it was
Mhm.
still pretty pricey, like
Yeah.
there was still a premium to it. But because so much free education has been out there for so long,
Yeah.
it's done a couple of things, right? Like number one, it's made it very accessible, very affordable. But
Mhm.
number two, I think it's also pushed everyone to raise the game.
Those who are serious about it, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges that the world has now, professionally speaking, is to kind of separate the good stuff from the not so good stuff from the great.
Yeah.
Finding the good stuff. I think of most things in this industry as that are happening today. I always use beauty shows as metaphors. I just think they speak to what we are, in a really important way. And I think of going to any big beauty show. If you're new, to find the good stuff is hard. You need someone to kind of help you to get to the right classrooms. To get
Right.
we know the Sams and the Andrews and the Gerards. And I have to mention co-founder of Hairbrain, Randy Taylor, as well. And we know, so many of us know these guys, but there's 200 educators in a building in different classrooms over 2 to 3 days. How do you find the good stuff? Same problem online. I think it's even more complicated because YouTube is a giant dumping ground, and it's easy to get lost and to think you're getting what you need. It's like eating junk food. When you're young and you don't understand nutrition, well, there's junk education too. No offense, to anybody, but there is.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk more specifically to the salons, because like you mentioned, there's so many different groups that were affected in different ways within our industry. So how have you seen those different groups and how they've been affected over this last 10 months?
Again, it's very, very different. Well, first, let's start with, it's been incredibly difficult on everybody. Everybody, even people, who have not had tremendous change. I'll include myself as one of those people, because we are in this digital space. If anything, our opportunities have increased. But yet we're all connected. We all feel each other's pain. And in my life, there's never been this much pain, in this country. It's pretty horrific. Another one of those words that just rattles around in my head is resilience, and it just reminds me this industry is there's so much positivity and so much great energy and so much resilience,
Yes.
And people are hanging in there. You look at California, which has just been a horror, with everything shut down. And yet, again, we see this resilience talking to people every day. So I'm extremely hopeful, for what's happening. I don't think we're going to learn really what's truly happening for another 3 or so months. I think, everybody's hanging on through the new year, seeing kind of where they were. What I do know is, this word reset is also used a lot in how we think about business, how we think about life. And when I go back to your question of, who's doing what or how folks are coping, the one thing I figured out early on talking to hairdressers was that when I started digging deep in the conversations, especially those doing okay, just hairdressers working behind the chair, salon owners doing okay, when I'm hearing so much pain from so many directions, well, what was the difference? An understanding pre-pandemic of personal finance and personal security and managing money, to me, is absolutely one of the fundamental differences between those who are getting through this in a better way versus everybody else. We've talked about it throughout my entire career, how important it is that we understand not only the money in the salon, but the money when we get it home. Have an emergency fund, have a savings account, live within our means. It's something we all struggle with. And it's just, to me, it's one of the bigger lessons that will come out of the pandemic. Yeah, me too. I grew up without a lot, and my folks didn't have great habits around money. And I woke up at like 38 and went, wait a minute, I've become mom and dad with money. It's not good. And so, it's a struggle, I think, for so many of us. But I hope that it's a wake-up call for many as well as we come through this. That on the other side of the pandemic, I think it's one of the more important things the industry needs to grapple with, which is like, how do we manage our money effectively? And the good news is, no matter how much we make, there's always a better way to manage it.
Yeah. And one of the things I know just, through this show and hearing commentary through this show and some of my coaching clients, that people have also learned how much different they can work with their finances. Because
Mm-hmm.
when
Yes.
they were like, okay, well, guess what? You're sitting at home. They immediately recognized how wasteful they had been with their finances, and
Yep.
even how wasteful they had been with how they treated the finances within the salon, with their booking process, with how they
Absolutely.
treated each client and maximizing each client. We had oh my gosh, as soon as don't you hate when you do that, dude? Like,
All the time. Every year it gets worse, by the way. I'll just warn you now.
thank you, Shannon King
Yes,
and
love
his
Shannon.
lovely wife were on
Yeah.
just maybe a few months ago. When they reopened, they were doing so much less actual traffic, but having more profitable days.
Yep. Yep.
And so I think so many people have this last year had this big reset button on so many aspects of how they view finances, how they use the money, how they ask for money, because, like, okay, guys, I need you to chip in a little bit more here. We're seeing prices raised that probably needed raised for 15 years or so.
Yep.
And also, Gordon, to your point, I got an email from my financial advisor just a couple of days ago that said that the national savings rate had gone from 9% to 12%.
Yep.
Which is encouraging. That
Very
I think we're actually learning some lessons here.
And I think one of the other big fundamental lessons is that all the things that we've been talking about for years on how to be successful, the simplicity of, ask for referrals, rebook those clients, recommend products or new services or whatever, that those three things that have been preached for as long as I've been in this industry, they work. And what I'm learning talking to people coming out of this is those who are doubling down on the fundamentals, the basics, they're finding additional success. I'm talking to folks who are surprised to be getting new clients in the midst of a pandemic because they're doing everything right and referrals are going up in spite of all the hardship that everybody's experiencing. I'm talking to salons who are finding kind of a new way to retail in terms of whether they're working with affiliate programs or other things, but are excited about it. And including, I was talking the other day to a salon that was not excited about retail. They found it cumbersome. They found it, too much to take care of. And now they're involved with a brand and an affiliate program, and they have no inventory, but they're talking to their clients. They're seeing the sales needle move.
Wow,
and
cool.
That excites me. That excites me. But it's connected to what we've really talked about for years as these like key drivers of business. And again, rebooking, referrals, and recommendations are at the core of all of it. So
that hasn't changed.
It works. And it's great to be reminded sometimes that we need to be thinking about that which has been proven time and time and time again to work. And so that excites me because the world has not changed. The world is experiencing a virus, and there are things that perhaps are going to stay with us against accelerants of trends like digital. But digital is not here because of the virus. Digital was here. It's been accelerated. And so I really feel much of what the salon industry has always been about, we will still be about, and much of what worked will still work. And I talk to my consumer friends, and they can't wait for this to be over so they can go back to the salon the way they always did. And so I think we're going to be 80-90% the way we were. I think salons are probably going to be changed the least of all the different parts of our industry. I really believe that.
Do you see that do you have anything specific that you see you do feel will change within the salons?
I think some of the physical stuff, the way salons have reorganized themselves and in terms of spacing and stuff, I think some of that will stay. Some of it out of laziness because we've changed it and there's not maybe a reason to change it back. And some, I think, because salons are finding some of it maybe to be advantageous, whether it's privacy, depending on how they set things up. I've talked to some salons who have the plexiglass up and they're like, we're going to keep it up. And they're not talking about safety. They're talking about a little bit of privacy, a little bit less noise perhaps between stations. And so I think that's the case. I think, but my gut is that not much is going to change because my sense of America is we're desperate to get back to the way it was. And so, I think in our day-to-day lives, going into business, whether it's restaurants or salons or the way we shop, if it can't be replaced by digital, meaning, if we could stick our head through the screen here and you could take care of me, fine. But that's not possible. So I really think we're going to go back very much from a service and being with clients. It's going to be very similar. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And I would not have said that 2 months ago, honestly.
Right. And I was just going to say, I kind of want to draw our attention back to when things very first happened, Gordon, because there was so much panic of, oh my gosh, my client is retouching their roots at home. Oh my gosh, my client is looking on YouTube on how to clipper his own hair. Like I published a video one time on my Instagram, and it was me cutting my own hair at home because I kind of thought it was funny. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, oh man, I'm just going to let this thing go. And my hair was like out to here. So I did a video of me like sitting in the mirror, cutting my own hair. And for the most part, people thought it was funny and cute or whatever. But there was a couple people that were like, this is terrible. You're teaching people how to do their hair at home. Like, we really thought as an industry, we were going to lose all of our clients to home services, Gordon.
Well,
Guys.
This is a fascinating topic for me, and it's one of the I think it's one of the big topics that the industry struggles with. And another one of those big words for me, two big words, from pandemic are context and perspective. Context being how something that we're thinking about fits into the larger world, and perspective, kind of our point of view. The industry fits into the world in an interesting way. The majority of people on the planet do not go to salons to take care of their hair. And if we roll the clock back, to an earlier time, go back 100 years, when there were salons, but most people economically were not able to go to them. Salons were for the wealthy. And then it's changed over time. Close to over 70% of people who color their hair do it at home. We've known that for a long time. So taking care of our hair, it began at home. For most of the world, it remains at home because of economics. And in America, it's become quite different. But I think the sensitivity, to that is misplaced. Food. I always think about food. It's like I don't hear my restaurant friends. I've got a lot of friends in the restaurant industry, but I don't hear them complaining about people cooking their food at home. It's just kind of like, okay, we do this and we do it at such a level that people are going to want to come for the experience.
Yes.
And the experience at home is completely different. So we are an elevated experience for those who can afford to come to us. And then over time, we've seen the industry in my lifetime niche out in a very significant way, because I was kind of here when the first Beau Ricks opened as a value price salon, and there was a lot of freaking out over that.
Right.
But I can also tell you that at the age of 20, I had been in a salon twice in my entire life, twice. And my family, because we weren't people of means, we didn't go to salons. And so the value thing helped a lot of people back in that era who probably were not going to salons. And so again, it's all connected to money and economics. And I think a recognition that not everybody has the wherewithal to participate in what we offer, and that we should sometimes be less judgmental about that and be thinking more about, like, how do we up our game and just maximize every opportunity we have, because there's so much opportunity in front of us. There's no reason to be trolling Andrew about a haircut.
Right. And Tara said it perfectly. Clients are too lazy to do their own hair. Let's face it. Like, your clients that did do some home color, they're going, please God, let me back in your salon now, because they don't want to do it. And just what she said, I've cut my hair a handful of times. I can't wait to go back to my barber, and I'm a professional hairdresser. Yep. So yeah, and Bonnie actually said they've seen a big increase in color service, actually. So
yeah,
and I think Anna mentioned that she had like a bunch of new clients too. So it's interesting. I think we just entered into it with, of course, fear hits us and it just makes us go, okay, what are all the potentials that could go wrong here? But I just wanted to kind of bring us back to that moment, because I want us to also recognize that here today, so many of those things that we created as stories didn't happen.
Two things just happened. I had a thought that went out of my head, and I just looked at my power, which is being sucked away quickly. So I'm going to probably have to change a little something in a moment. But
okay.
So it was like you and I were struggling with technology before we got here. And I'm like, why is my power being sucked away and I'm not actually hardwired into the power? I'll ponder that while I go back to what we were talking about in terms of, hair color, I think specifically. Again, I think we live in a society of a continuum of resources. And I just think that in spite of all the great things we do, that we need to give society some wiggle room and realize that we are in many ways an aspirational industry. And that again, there are people in the pandemic who are going to leave the salon. They have no choice, financially, they have no choice. But if we do what we do well, they're going to be in a rush to get back, but we may have to be patient for some of them. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the judgment sometimes drives me a little crazy. Right. As my mom, was the person who didn't have resources until I was all grown up, and she and her sister took care of each other's hair the best they could. And, it was fun. It's okay. No judgment.
Yep. And, there was so much contention and just kind of like infighting and stuff about, providing clients with their color formulations or providing them with home kits and stuff. Like one of the things that you just said is, I know quite a few stylists that did take that step, and their clients are so loyal to them now. Mm-hmm. Because they continued to take care of them the best that they could. And, it's looking past just, am I going to have this result from this step? It's also seeing about, well, how do you take care of people in their time of need? And like you said, might not be next month that they get to come back because maybe they're hurting financially. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee if you were the person that took care of them through their time of need, they are going to sit in your chair again.
Exactly.
So, it's just expanding that kind of view of what effects we might actually have from these things.
Yes, exactly. Now I'm going to stop my cam for a second, but I'm going to still talk, and I'm hoping this is like 5 seconds, and we can still talk, Andrew, while I multitask, because I'm worried I'm going to lose you in a second. But I'm still with you, right?
We can still hear you.
There you go. Let's keep talking then.
All right. So we've kind of established, and I actually personally do tend to agree with you. I don't think that things are going to change drastically from specifically a salon clientele standpoint. I've definitely heard from a lot of hairdressers that they're going to change how they do business, as far as how tightly they're booking, what they're charging, and even how much they're working, because they finally got a taste of not working 60-hour work weeks with triple booking the whole time. And they're like, oh, life is actually pretty good if I'm not completely burned out. So I think some of those things change, but yeah, I don't personally think the way that we operate and what we do behind the chair is necessarily going to drastically shift. So what are some of the places you do see that the industry is shifting pretty dramatically?
Well, again, we talked a little bit about events and education, and the one thing I want to add, I'm trying to get my camera back on, and it's going to be a different camera audience, so we'll see how this goes. There, I'm back.
Cool, we got you.
And my power is now officially good. The one thing I didn't mention with events is I do think, that if Sam Villa in the future is in Des Moines, Iowa at the local beauty show, which again, I think will be a very different local beauty show than 20 years ago, then that presentation will probably go out to the world from Des Moines. And so I think no matter where events are, and regardless of the scale, that the opportunity to take content and send it out live and or afterwards is a game changer, yes. Both for the audience and the industry, and for Sam, who won't have to travel as much. So I think events are going to be radically impacted. We talked about education. I think beauty schools, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with beauty schools. They are deeply into digital education now. We've seen that ramp up in a huge way. While schools were shut down, most of the states allowed them to offer digital education as a way to earn hours. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to go away. I think from what I'm hearing from states, most of them are going to allow it to continue. There's good and bad in that. I love digital education. I've talked to a lot of hairdresser friends about this, including young hairdressers, and just said, if your theory and everything was online, knowing you're out of school now and haven't experienced it this way, what's your gut? Like, how do you feel you would have landed in it? And I hear mostly concern that lot of it based on, learning disabilities and other things, that digital learning, for some in theory, in science and in the book learning, that is so much of what's being digitized, that there are concerns. So I do have concern with how we're going to navigate digital education combined with real-time education in the school market. And when I combine that with a very big trend that I think has impacted us negatively over the last 10 years, which is, I believe, not the total elimination, but probably 80% of apprenticeships and assistantships in this country have gone away.
Yeah.
So when you take away that, which was really kind of a really essential building block for so many careers, when you take that opportunity away from probably 80% of new graduates, to me, that means schools have to up their game. And it also means the industry, we have to rethink how we prepare people to succeed once they've gotten into a job, which gives folks like you all at Zambian and us at Harebrained who do digital education some new opportunities, but also some, I think, very interesting challenges. So I think, the school world's going to change. And by the way, they're one of the big winners in the pandemic. Everybody I talk to in the school industry tells me the same thing, which is record enrollments. We're coming through a difficult time. So it's interesting economically, because typically when you come through something like this, we see a contraction. We see hard times. Industries tend to contract, meaning fewer customers. Often the workforce gets a little smaller. And then you have to kind of navigate yourself as an industry to the new normal. As that's happening, if we have record students, meaning record graduates coming into the market, that brings a whole nother level of challenges, and they could be very significant and could have a big impact on the industry, and not necessarily in a positive way. It's up to us as the industry and the institutions to kind of figure out how to best get us where we need to be. That's the regulatory bodies, that's the schools, that's the associations, the brands, all of us. We have a big job always in protecting the next generation coming in. And that's an area I don't think we spend enough time thinking about, to be perfectly honest. The model of state boards and how we were regulated, kind of came into being 60, 70 years ago, and honestly hasn't changed much since the early 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully that will be one of the kind of side effects of exactly what you're saying is if we're going to make this shift in how we educate, hopefully we'll also make a shift in how we certify.
Yes. That's interesting. I would argue that we don't. I would argue that we don't certify. To me, certification is a process that goes is a much different process than the state board, testing model, which has needed reform for decades, and I work very close to it. And that's not in any way to point a finger at schools. A lot of folks are like, oh, schools this, schools that. I always tell folks, I went to a university, and everybody complained about that too. I have friends that graduated from Harvard. They'll tell you how bad it was, quote unquote. What I know about the history of the industry is that the rules that we follow were born from salons. Governments look to us to tell them how to regulate the professional beauty industry. It all came from the industry. I lived through much of it. We can change it. We have more say than we realize. We have to get organized. But if the industry collectively doesn't think the system is the right system, which I would argue it doesn't believe that, it needs to get to work, to start to make changes, because we've been talking about it for decades and done very little about it.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned that you feel like with that flood of students coming out, that there's going to be some big challenges. What do you perceive those challenges are going to be?
Kind of an exponential, the same challenges that we had before pandemic, but I think there's going to be more of it, because we're going to have a record number of new people coming into the industry. So pre-pandemic, the apprenticeships were almost all gone already. So it's not that the problems are new. I think the problem will be magnified because enrollments are up. So we'll have more folks coming in. We don't like to talk about economics in the industry very much. It kind of gets wonky, but supply and demand. I've long argued that we have too many salons and too many working hairdressers in the industry, based on, compared to the number of clients that are wanting to be in salons every day. And every time we go through a big recession and we see a contraction of the industry, it's like the pruning of a tree. The dead wood comes away and everything else comes back healthier. It happens pretty much like clockwork every single time within a few years. And this pandemic is such a strange anomaly, disastrous event. I think it's going to be different. And the enrollments have been supercharged by the pandemic. And now the graduations, which really have nothing to do with a need for more people, it's just, again, probably you've got millions of people out of work who are now rethinking their lives, saying, I always wanted to be a hairdresser, maybe now's the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to have a lot more of them than we've had coming into the industry in years past, at a time perhaps when the opposite should be happening from an economic perspective. So it's potentially just going to be a lot more bodies, and it's going to be interesting to see how we absorb, the labor force and where it ultimately takes us.
Yeah. I have heard from a handful of salon owners at this point that they did definitely lose staff during this, because for a lot of people, it was even just the fact of like, okay, you are at home. Oh, you know what? I don't really necessarily have to be at the salon, and I'm really enjoying being a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad or whatever it might be. So I think there has been a little bit of that shedding, but it's interesting, to think about the fact that, and just to your point too, when we're talking about the shedding of the tree, we're not necessarily talking about people that their passion was in their work. It's the group that is in your salon, and you guys know who they are, that they're fine working there, but they're not the people that are totally in love with the industry and totally in love with their craft. Like, those aren't necessarily the people that are shedding during that time. It's the people that are kind of being put in a position to go, is this really even for me? Right. And for a lot of them, it's probably the perfect time for them to start to explore a different place. It's probably beneficial, actually.
And the same with older. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I agree with you that a lot of times that's a beneficial step for the industry as a whole too.
Yeah. I mean, it's small businesses generally in America, they can live almost endlessly sometimes, if they're small enough and they can manage their expenses and not be profitable, not necessarily be satisfied or happy. And so I have talked to a lot of salons that have been around for a long time, where the owner's like, had a great career, peaked a few years back and been kind of coasting. And I've just made a decision that instead of retiring in 5 years, I'm going to retire now. And so I think, you have a lot of those decisions. You mentioned all the personal stuff. But like every industry too, we have a lot of people who just live on the edge financially. And there's reasons for that. And those reasons probably don't connect to being a great business or a great service provider or a great experience provider. So we have a lot of the industry that lives in those gray areas, and not all of them will make it.
It was weird to kind of think too, like we had those fires go through our town here and burned, quite a few hundred businesses down. And, a handful of them were definitely things that probably should have closed a long time ago. And I would, in my heart, I was almost like, gosh, I almost hope that at least for a few of those people, this was the most terrible blessing that's ever happened. Because maybe in that person that has been struggling and wanting out of that business for so long, but has debts and all this stuff, maybe some insurance money came or something like that. So, sometimes those losses kind of have a weird, and as terrible as they might be, kind of a silver lining to them too.
Yeah, they can. And I'm going to say, there's been a lot of talk since the pandemic, began about estimates of how many people would leave the industry, how many closings would there be. I was reading one of the media platforms the other day said 30 to 40% of salons would close. I'm here to say that we project not more than 10% of salons will close. We watch this very, very carefully. We talk every day, as you guys do, to people throughout the entire industry. I'm talking to distributors every day saying, what are you seeing on the ground? And, it's important. We care about the industry. We want to know what's happening so we know what we can do, our part to make it better. And I'm really hopeful. 10% may sound horrible, but it's not 20% or 30% or 40%. There's a lot of talk about how many people are leaving the industry. We do hear about it, but that's a really hard thing to understand and to know how true it is. Again, I'm very hopeful. And I'll feel horrible for every person who leaves the industry and every business that doesn't make it. But coming through this horrific pandemic, if we can be in that 10% range, that to me is a blessing.
Yeah, I hear you. The one thing that you did just mention too, that I'd just be curious if you have a sense of what's happening with distributorships through this.
Yeah, another, there's so many unknowns. The distributorships, pre-pandemic, again, I think as context, distribution has been going through change for a long time. In the last, talk about those big events of the last, my 40 years, one of the biggest events was the consolidation of distributors, meaning that when I was growing up, we had all these little distributors all over the country. It was an industry filled with independent distributors in local markets. And then they began to be acquired, and we have two giant distribution companies. Both companies I have a huge respect for. I have a lot of friends who work at both of them, and they have 80% of American distribution. And so at any time in the industry, you have that big consolidation where a couple of players owns most of the market, things start to the marketplace itself usually tends to start to question what's happening, and it's a time for a shift. That was going on probably for the last 5 years. The pandemic hits, supercharges digital. Again, we're seeing everybody in the distribution world looking at now e-com and how can we have less interruption of salons. I mean, one of the biggest complaints I've heard about the distribution space was salons being frustrated with folks coming into their business to try to help them at the worst time ever. It's always the worst time. It's always my busiest day. And so, the digital side of this will help, but I think there's huge question marks as to where distribution ultimately is going. It's again, we have a lot more brands that are going direct to the salon. The store model itself, I think, is up in the air a little bit. Again, I have a feeling we're going to go back to the way it was, but whether distributors will feel the same way, I don't know. I think in the distribution world, I think there's a lot of conversations about how can we make everything digital? How can we be a different version, a better version of Amazon for the beauty industry? So I think the conversations are happening. Where ultimately it goes, I don't know. But I think on the losing side of this, I think there's no question that the distributor sales consultants they've been shrinking for the last 10 years. And if we come out the other side of the pandemic with much of that left in place, I will be surprised. And that will be a big loss because so many salons are successful because of the distributor sales consultants they've known over the years.
Yeah. And I feel that because there's been so many sales consultants that have just become like great friends of mine over the years. And people, when I was a salon owner, that just like helped us so much. They were the ones coming through the front door. Here's what's happening. Here's the education. Here's the new products. What can I do for you? Hey, I'll go through your color shelves. I'll do your color order for you. That totally agree with you. I think that's going to be a devastating loss to us to potentially lose those. And let's say prayers that we figure out a way to not lose that person, that connection, and maybe someone's out there completely reconfiguring how that distribution process happens, and maybe we'll be surprised, Gordon.
Well, also, so as businesses and industries do reconfigure, they do shed some things. Let's pretend for a moment that the DSCs, the distributor sales consultants, let's pretend that just got pushed off to the side by distribution. I'm not saying that's the case, but let's pretend. Someone else will see an opportunity and come fill the gap, and I'm going to connect it to what I see happening right now. And I know you're involved in some of this yourself and have been for a while, which is coaching. The coaching side of our business has really blown up in the last couple of years. And I think since pandemic, I'm every time I turn around, I'm seeing, another version of coaching and all good stuff. I mean, I'm really impressed by what I'm seeing. And I believe that some of that is going to fill in for what we just talked about. But I think every part of the evolution, if there's something good that's left off on the side, that some part of the industry just has to jettison for whatever the reason is, something that the industry coveted, another part of the industry will step in and grab onto that, reconfigure it, and bring it out in a new way. And I think time will solve much of this for us. Yeah.
Love that perception, because you're totally right. It's like in the absence of one thing, something else becomes available. And, to the point, those DSCs talk about being great salon coaches. I mean, they would morph into fantastic salon
Yep.
coaches. Absolutely.
Exactly. And also, the things that we do now, perhaps not everybody avails themselves to. There might be some great distributor sales consultants going into some salons that take advantage of their skills and knowledge, and others that don't.
Mhm.
And so when we see the change in the new version of whatever that is, those who don't need it, use it, want it, they'll just get left out. So you don't need as many DSCs to take care of the people, so again, lots of changes.
Yeah. So let's say this has been an epic change, an epic shift in our industry. We all know that. Yes, there will kind of settle at some point into whatever we want to refer to it as. I don't like this term, the new normal. It rubs me wrong for some weird reason, but we'll just call it that. So the other truth is, Gordon, that life always continues to change. It always continues to shape. So how do we stay, like you mentioned that word, resilient? How do we as hairdressers, how do we as salon owners, and even we've got some students watching today, how do we stay resilient and keep adapting to this changing world we're in?
Well, first off, we're not a very normal industry, I will say, as someone who's been in it forever and loves it. And I think that's where your frustration with the new normal comes from, because we weren't normal to start. We're too much fun to be normal. We're too cool to be normal. You all are too cool to be normal. So going back to words again, I think, patience and determination, I've said for a long time, observing people who are successful and talking to them and looking at like what made them, who they are today. I hear that so often, that it's so important that we things take time, success takes time. Coming out of the pandemic is going to take time. And if you really love what you're doing, I think, to have patience, is really, really important. But simultaneously, you just can't sit around and wait. You've got to be doing the work. And I think that's where the determination comes in. That's where people who are watching us this evening, are interested enough to hear about what things might be looking like on the other side of this. That's a level of determination. I think, that's really important. I had, years ago, one of the highlights of my career, and I've had many, many highlights, but one of the highlights, I got to sit with Vidal Sassoon for about 3 hours. Wow. And which is really, weird, and in a good way. And I knew Vidal, but I didn't know him well, and it was the only time I really sat with him. And I got to ask him, like, if you were going to tell a young person, how could they become successful, become like you, what would your advice be? And I remember it so well, and I'm sure I'll never forget it, but he said 3 things. He said, it's all about passion. He said, number one, it's a passion for the craft. And then, I don't know if you ever got to spend time with him, but he spoke with his hands, and it was just he just had so much charisma. But he's explaining, and as he's talking about the craft, he's kind of doing, but a passion for the craft. He's like, a passion for learning. He's like, I'm always reading 2 books, a fiction book, a nonfiction book. When I was doing hair, I was just passionate about learning, always learning something every single day, not just from time to time, every single day. And then he said, and a passion for service. And he said, being in service of people, your fellow human beings. He says, not the act of doing the service, but truly a passion for your fellow human beings and being in their service. And he said, those 3 things will always serve you well. I think they served him well. And that conversation I had with him was a couple of years before he passed, and that's been some time now. And I think in the pandemic and post-pandemic, Vidal's advice is spot on. That passion for your craft, that passion for always learning, and that passion for your client. Game changer if you're not there already.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's a great way to wrap this up, man. And so, Gordon, I don't think there's probably anyone that's watching that doesn't know you and doesn't know how to connect with you.
Not true.
If you don't, you guys need to be following this dude. He's hilarious. He posts the funniest coffee comments. He likes to swear, which I love. So definitely give him a follow at Gordon at GORDNM on Instagram. Is there anywhere else they can connect with you?
That's my home of choice at the moment. I've been avoiding I'm on Facebook, but I don't spend much time there because it's gotten a little crazy over there. And Hairbrained _official. That's us on Instagram, hairbrained.me. That's our online platform. Hairbrained on Facebook. All those are places that you can engage with us as well. We mentioned, we have our education platform, hblive.me, and all those places. And someday soon at a beauty show.
There you go. And just before we wrap up, is there anything particularly exciting happening at Hairbrain that you'd love to share?
Every single day. I mean, we have so much that's going on, but I would just leave folks with one thing, and that again is the excitement around digital education. I remember, you guys are in it, we're in it. As you said, you were excited that we're both in it. I remember saying to Sam many years ago, I was following digital 8 or 9 years ago, and bumped into Sam, and I said, you're one of the most important people in the industry when it comes to digital, because you're leading the way. He truly was. He was an inspiration to anybody who's in this space, including Hairbrain. And so we just launched a subscription program for education. We continue to just be so focused on anything and everything we can do to deliver great education online. So HB Live, HB as in Hairbrain, LIVE.me. And we have a subscription offer. Our entire library now you can get for $19 a month. So
holy cow,
that would be my last little thing to say, a little commercial announcement. But everybody check it out, please. And most importantly, first of all, I'm so grateful to you for having me. I'm even more grateful to the industry for having me for all these years. All my best to Sam and the team over there, and everybody at Hairbrain gives our best to you guys, and as importantly to the entire industry. We want everybody to hang in there, be strong, and prove to the world, just how resilient this industry is.
Yeah. And I know I can say this on behalf of all of us at Zambia. We are so blessed to have you tonight, but also I'm going to say this on behalf of the entire industry. We as an industry are very blessed to have your hands in so much that's happened over these last 40 years, Gordon. Thank you so much for what you do for us.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank
you all. We'll see you next
everybody.
week with some more education.
Thank you.